All right, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Since everyone is here, I think we are good to go, InShaAllah. But before we get into the serious stuff, I would like it if we could go around and kind of introduce ourselves. I can go first, InShaAllah. My name is Zainah. I'm in my second year in psychology. And a fun fact about me is I'm a little obsessed with Arabic poetry.
I can go next if you want. Hi guys, my name is Areej. I'm in my fourth year doing software engineering in Ivy. In terms of a fun fact, this blows people away, but I've never had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, so that's my fun fact. Yeah.
I can go. I'm Munya. I'm in grade 12 at Lucas. InShaAllah, I'll be at Huron next year. And fun fact is I play piano.
All right, and my name is Insiya, and I'm in my third year of MedSci. And a fun fact about me is that I really like to read and journal.
These are really fun facts. And I've never met anyone who's never had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like, that is one of a kind.
There's more I could add to the list, but I don't want to get canceled, so I'm just gonna keep quiet.
We'll do that on our second episode, don't worry. So, we gather here today to discuss a very sensitive topic. For those that might need a refresher, I'm going to give you a little recap. So, on Saturday, June 6th of 2021, the Afzaal family was tragically murdered after being hit by a pickup truck while on a night walk in their neighborhood. Salman and his wife, Madiha, and their 15-year-old daughter, Yumna, and her grandmother, Talat, all lost their lives, leaving Faiz, who's 9 years old, as the sole survivor. The offender has been since in custody, and he's facing 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. And the prosecutors will also pursue terrorism charges, and he's scheduled to appear in court on April 12th. And of course, we all know that these actions were committed by him, were deliberate and intentional due to them being Muslim. When I first heard the news, I was kind of in complete shock. I at some point, like, I didn't even want to believe it. Like, I was in so much denial that I was like, maybe they're just making a big deal out of this. Maybe it's not that serious. What about you, Areej? What did you think? How did you first feel?
Yeah, so it's an interesting experience to recall the memories because I actually haven't had a chance ever since it happened to think about it. I think being a part of the MSA, like finding out, the first thing you have to do is start like addressing, putting out posts, providing resources to people. So I've never actually had a chance to recount events until now. But looking back, I remember I didn't find out through the news first. I found out because I was on Instagram and I had a friend post on her story and she was very upset. And it was just out of context. I had no idea what was going on, but I thought it was her family or something happened with her family. And then as things were coming out in terms of the news and there was a Muslim family killed and it being so close to my house, I think it's like a 5-minute, 10-minute walk. So I just didn't know who it was. I think in that moment, it was really just trying to figure out, is it somebody that I know, And then it was a really weird day because it was a Monday morning. I had work. My boss wanted to have meetings with me and stuff. And the only thing going through my mind was like, what's going on, right? And I did my internship at Ivy. And I just felt really out of place in terms of how do I explain this to someone? How do I explain this to someone who like doesn't understand like that something happened in the news, right? Because you don't know what happened. The details aren't out yet. But yeah, it was a lot of anxiety and a lot of just worrying about who it is, what happened, what's going on, because there wasn't a lot of information. But yeah, that's kind of like initially how I felt. I'll pass it off to someone else and then we can go on.
Yeah, I mean, I could kind of chime in. I think during that year, it was like the online year. So I was in Brampton, which is where my family lives. So for me, it's like everyone in Brampton, I still felt like London is still kind of 2 hours away from here. So it was still kind of a little bit far removed. Like it was still a thing that happened over in London, a little bit further away. But for me, it was like I still go to school in London. Like I live in London now. So it was like it hit closer to me than I felt it was hitting anyone else in Brampton. And people would call and they'd be like, oh, what's happening in your London? Right. Like they would say things like that. Or they would know because I go to school in London. And it was kind of like, and I felt some kind of like I felt a sort of shame, like that I was studying in London, I lived in London, and this was happening in that city. And I felt that people were kind of connecting me with the city a lot then. But it was just a shock, right? Because the more details you learned about the story, like the worse it got, I think. And it just like the more and more the news kind of put out, or the more you heard from community members, like it just every detail just like dug you deeper, and it was just horrifying.
Yeah, I had a kind of similar experience to Areej. So I was in school at the time because it was a Monday, and I was in math class, but it was online. And I like logged off of my math class and went upstairs to talk to my mom. And I was talking to my mom, and I was like complaining about how hard grade 11 math was. And my mom was like, "You haven't heard yet." And so she told me what happened. And I also, similar to what you guys said, like I was just in absolute like shock. And I didn't really I don't think I processed it for a really long time. And I remember like emailing my teacher and being like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to be in class tomorrow. And he hadn't heard yet, so it was really strange because I didn't know how to explain it to people. A lot of my friends aren't Muslim, so I didn't really know how to explain that feeling to them. Um, and also so Yumna went to London Islamic School in elementary school, which was my elementary school, and she was in my younger brother's class. So I didn't know her personally, but there was some level of connection, which was just really hard to like wrap my head around, I think.
Yeah, well, I agree. We're all faced kind of similar experiences. We're all kind of just in pure shock and kind of sad about that this just happened. But I'm curious, were you guys scared by any chance after the incident?
Oh, go ahead. I saw someone.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I remember I had been planning that night. I had been planning to walk to Marble Slab with my friend, and I was like, yeah, absolutely not. Um, and then I did like kind of realize like over the next few months, like I realized that I had started getting a lot of anxiety around like being in public, especially with like other hijabis, and like feeling kind of like a target in like crowded spaces, which I hadn't really experienced before. Like I hadn't really been nervous about that before.
Yeah, similarly, like I used to go out on walks like in the evening because with like school being online, things being online, work being online, you don't really get much physical activity in. That all stopped, and that stopped for a very long time, just because like when the news initially came out, people didn't really know if it was like hate motivated, what was behind it, whether it was just an accident, right? But then as details came out later in the day in terms of it being a hate crime, it got me and my family worried in the sense that are there more people? Like who else was involved? Like you know what I'm saying? What else could have happened? And the fact that I think the individual had parked his car right beside near the mosque, it really got me thinking that like this probably can't be like a like individual on his own, right? It might be more people involved. So after that, yeah, no walking, and especially when I do walk at night or when I was trying to go out, it'd be a constant looking back at the car coming from behind me and making sure it passes first and then turning back and continue my like walking. Does that make sense? Like I just was stopped. It doesn't matter what car was coming. I stopped, turned around, was watching it, and just making sure it's not coming in my direction. And then I turn around and I keep going.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I think with the
Go ahead.
car thing, I think for a long time after I had this like fear that any like of walking in front of any car, because you don't realize how much kind of trust you put in the cars at the crosswalk. Because you cross the crosswalk and there's four cars on each side. Like you put a lot of trust in the people sitting in them to not run you over, right? And for a long time I felt like that trust was definitely completely gone. Like I was like walking as fast as I could past any car, and actually like a couple days after the London hate attack, I was like crossing the crosswalk, and I try to make eye contact with like any car just so like they know that I'm crossing. So I was making eye contact with this car and it was like coming, but I was crossing the crosswalk, but this person just kept driving like up until they were like this close to me. And I thought that was like, even if you're in a rush or even if, you had no intention of doing anything, I feel like that week after that attack was really insensitive. Like, obviously, I'm a hijabi. Like, to get that close to me, like, I was here and I was walking and they just made eye contact with me and drove right up to me. And I was like, I was very scared after. And every time, like, I would just walk really fast past any, like, front of any car. So, yeah, just like what Areej was saying.
Just to bounce back off of what Insiya said, in terms of like the day it happened and finding out there was a black pickup truck, I think it was a black Ford pickup truck. You have no idea. I went out that day because my family was looking to move and stuff, so we had to go see houses and things. When I was driving around London, the number of black pickup trucks I counted was 11, and like that's something that I will never forget. The fact that it just had come out in the news, I think 3 p.m., 4 p.m. And then anytime, like when we were driving after that, like every single black pickup truck is something that just like I identified and it just stuck with me. Yeah.
And just to bounce off of that, I have a lot of friends that told me that they feel triggered when they see a black pickup truck, especially when it's speeding, and they feel loss of control over their lives just because of that. So it's very tragic. I want to move on to our next discussion point, which is, do you guys feel supported by our London community, or do you guys feel supported by our federal, provincial government?
Can I start?
Yeah, please go ahead.
One of the things I wanted to mention when you asked the question of how we felt when we first heard of the tragedy, and then in terms of the London community, one of the things that I'm not super appreciative of is the fact that when it happened, the number of media requests that were coming to the MSA in terms of people being interviewed, I was interviewed multiple times. I think I gave at least 4 or 5 interviews, radio interviews, and like CBC or whatever it is. And so I never had the time to actually take that time to myself and understand everything that's going on. It became more of this is the only opportunity that we have to speak about Islamophobia. So put our feelings aside and speak up about it, right? Because no one else is going to listen to us at like a year from now. Like, and it's just tragic. It's actually just awful. It's horrific if you ask me, in terms of like people having to publicize for people dying in order to get a message out of like, you shouldn't be racist, right? So in that sense, from the London community, I was expecting more in terms of support. I feel like we did a lot of things that were very like PR focused, like whether it was a vigil and all those like politicians coming in. I don't think we got the support that we needed. It was more like people were coming together and people were just doing things in terms of PR, and that's it. But that's how I felt initially. I'll pass it off to anyone else if they have anything to add.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, I don't know if I would say I felt supported. Like I got so I worked at Michael's at the time, and I wore like a green and purple ribbon on my vest. Um, and I had a lot of people comment on it, and the most common thing I think like at least once or twice a day for the next like week was, I can't believe something like this would happen here, or something like that, where I just can't wrap my head around why someone would do something like this. And it's like, that's such a like, it's, I guess it's like a nice sentiment that you're, trying to express, your compassion and sympathy. But it was something that made me actually really upset because, um it felt like people didn't recognize racism in London until now, and they didn't think that racism in London existed until now. And so there was a lot of like, this isn't our city, this isn't who we are, I don't understand how this happened, um, which just didn't, I don't know, that just, it was never something that felt very supportive to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think even the politicians that came out and spoke, and politicians that spoke out on like their own platforms, on their own kind of social media, were kind of, you know, echoing the same thing, like this doesn't happen in Canada, which I think really represents kind of the naivety, or maybe just kind of their own arrogance to it, right? Because you allow these like acts of hate to build up until it gets so big that you have to say, oh, I didn't think this happened here, because you've been ignoring all of the kind of signs this whole time, or all of the little things that build up to something as big as a hate attack. And even just the politicians that were coming out, it felt like a lot of what they were saying was a PR stunt, just like Areej said. Because if you looked at their platforms, if you looked at the policies they were pushing, at the kind of advocacy that they've done before, it was all very anti-Muslim and very anti-Islam, and frankly very racist. But because of the fact that, you know, all eyes were on them and they were expected to come out and speak, they did. They said all the right things, you know, they said all the words in their speeches, but then right again the next week you would see them, their policies are not really matching up, their policies aren't doing much for the Muslim community, right? So it really felt like it was very blatant hypocrisy. And that's not for every politician. There are some that really went on to, you know, make some good changes, but it was just, you really could kind of see it that day on the news.
Just to jump in real quick, sorry, Zainah, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
But I was actually supposed to speak at the vigil where all the politicians were coming in. I was supposed to represent Western MSA. I got cut because of the other politicians, which I thought was very interesting, because isn't the point of a vigil for the community to come together, right? So shouldn't the Muslim body at like Western, which is a really big body, have the opportunity to say something in terms of everyone and knowing how they're feeling? Like we wrote up the entire thing. It was really like last minute they had asked us, they put us in. And I just remember being there, waiting to go up, but then being told that, oh, you can't go up because we don't have enough time. And I was like, you know, like it really occurred to me at that moment that this isn't meant for us. This is performative. This is meant for the politicians to come and hijack this entire event and make it about them. I think we had a real vigil afterwards when all of that was over, probably a week later, even the walk. But I wouldn't consider that vigil being anything special. I really just think it was a lot of attention in media that came because all the politicians were coming. But even what they promised or what they've spoken about, let's look at what's happening like today. Have any changes really like occurred, right? What they promised, like, did anything go through yet? From what I can tell, not really. So it's more of the Muslim community still working hard to pushing acts and motions forward, and not the politicians.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it was a lot of like, all of these politicians from all of these different parties who came and like stood in front of our mosque and said Islamophobia doesn't have any place in Canada and we're pledging to fight Islamophobia. And then a few months later we had an election, and those exact same politicians were refusing to acknowledge Bill 21 being a discriminatory bill, actually asking for an apology for calling Bill 21 a discriminatory bill. So, I mean, I think it was obvious from the beginning, but during the election, it really, at least for me, became like, okay, so this really doesn't mean anything to these people, which just sucks, I think, for everyone.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, because we, like, during that month after we saw the visual, we saw the snowbirds, you know, the fighter jets in the sky. We saw the multi-faith solidarity march, but we didn't see actual change. But right now, I saw on the news that there is this new bill, the Our London Family Act. What do we think of that? Is that going to really change anything in terms of hate crimes here in Canada?
I think because like I'm the campus liaison for NCCM from the TMA, and like I think NCCM, they really do a whole lot, right? And I think a lot of what they do comes from a very good place of wanting to inspire change and wanting to kind of really push for reform. And the London Family Act really is kind of in any word, kind of like revolutionary in the things it's demanding. It's one thing whether or not it'll actually get implemented and passed and really embraced, but the things it demands are very kind of important. So there's like changes to the education system, there's like dismantling white supremacist groups and accountability for hate crimes and a lot of human rights claims, like increasing the limitation period for people that are seeking human rights claims. So it's like there's no cap on like, oh, it has to be a 10-year-old crime versus a 20-year-old crime. And I think a lot of these things are really strong points, and there is such a big push for it right now. So, you know, hopefully we see something come out of this, because it's definitely a strong initiative, but we know how hard it is to get anything passed that's this progressive, right? So we even see the work that's being done with Bill 21, like Munya was talking about, and it is really hard. Like it's such a slow process. So, but yeah, I think it inspires a little bit of hope.
Definitely, just to like chime off of what Insiya said, I think it's a great act that they're putting forward. I don't mean to be pessimistic about it, but just given how politicians work, I'm just really hoping it does go through, because again, like for us to come up and like at the end of the day, like it's the NCCM who came up with this and who has been working on this. I don't see any politician who spoke at that vigil being the ones to create this and bring this forward, right? So from that aspect, it's like I'm proud of the Muslim community for what they've been able to do, but I'm a little doubtful in terms of these politicians and their promises to us and whether they'd actually be able to go through in terms of getting this like moving forward and everything.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think you guys both really summarized everything I was going to say.
And like just to talk about what Areej said, like just the kind of labor that minority groups have to put in to get their rights like acknowledged in like the governmental processes is really like interesting and eye-opening, right? Like NCCM puts in all this work, and all the Muslim groups have to put in all this work and like begging and pleading, just like, you know, getting their rights acknowledged, just basic human rights, basic kind of liberties that are afforded to others in Canada, and still, like after all the work's already been done, you don't really see that kind of helping hand being extended from the other side. So that's definitely like a really saddening thing to see, I think.
I agree. Minorities have to do so much and get so little, which gets me to my second point. How have you guys seen Western like fighting against Islamophobia? Like, do you guys see any changes? Do you guys notice anything different coming back this year, or even in high schools, Munya? Did you notice anything different?
Yeah, I can start for that one. So at my high school, specifically Lucas, we haven't seen anything. I'm trying to think if there were any. We like had a video shown for Islamic Heritage Month, but that was about it. And just kind of based in past experiences with like the MSA, a lot of everything has to really come from students, and we have to really push for the things that we want and need. Like even like prayer space has been a difficult thing in the past, which is like such a bare minimum. So any anti-Islamophobia like implements are gonna have to come from outside sources. Like I don't really see our administration and our teachers like actually implementing it on their own.
All right. So now that we're almost 8 months after, how do you guys feel right now reflecting on this event? Have you guys changed at all in comparison to 8 months ago?
I can start for this one. I definitely think I have. I think I've changed in the sense of really understanding how short life is and you don't know when you're going to go, right? So I've always, like, over the past 2 years, I've really turned to Islamic studies and wanting to learn more. And I think over the past 8 months, the reason I've taken it really seriously and making time for it within my life is because of being reminded of the fact that, whether it's being Muslim or whatever it is, like, you don't know if something's going to happen to you or not, and you just want to be best prepared for that. I think in terms of leaving the house, I still have anxiety when I leave the house, if I'm being entirely honest, but it's not, I don't know when that'll go away. I don't know if it'll ever go away. I know that I don't like being on campus when I don't have to. I prefer to be at home, because when it comes to praying and making wudu and all these things, like, it just poses it's a difficulty, and just having to explain to people what's going on, and unless you're not providing the resources for me to be on campus like for the entire day, it's, and like not caring enough to do something about it. I think I just feel safer and more comfortable at home, and that is the change that I have brought upon myself. Going forward, I want that to change. I want to be able to go back to being a person who can leave the house and, like, go do things, but I think it'll definitely take more time.
Yeah, in terms of like just kind of the difference in how I feel about it, I think I'm just like a lot more, I don't know how to explain it other than like tired, like now. When it first happened and for like the month-ish following, I was like just really, really angry and upset like all the time. Like I don't think I was just kind of like in a neutral state for a while. And now it's like any conversation about like racism or anything like that is just like so exhausting to me because I never feel like we're getting anywhere, and I never feel like people um understand, I guess. And I don't really know how you get anywhere with that, because if you can't have those conversations, then you don't make any progress. But yeah. And I also lots of anxiety, even just like riding the bus, if I'm like the only like hijabi on the bus, like that worries me. Or if I'm the only person on the bus, sometimes that worries me. So I don't know if that gets better. But hopefully.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
I would.
to, oh, sorry, go ahead,
Oh
please.
no, that's okay. I was just gonna say that you do definitely become kind of hyper aware, right, of all the possibilities of the kind of hate crimes. Like even this past summer, and just like in these past couple of months, all the hate attacks on hijabis in like Alberta and in all of these kind of provinces, it you kind of become hyper aware, but at the same time, you're becoming so numb to it because you hear it again and again and again. And it's like, it's sad, but it's not even shocking anymore, right? Which is a horrible state to be in. Like this should shock us, and this should frighten us, but it's like, you just hear it so many times, like how much more are you going to react, right? But I think on the other side, though, I think after reflecting on this incident, I've come to realize what a symbol of strength and bravery like the hijab is. Just knowing and kind of like appreciating like people I know that go out and they wear hijab in public, and how you're immediately recognized as a Muslim, and how anyone in your vicinity is even recognized as Muslim, right? Like your brothers and your father. I have grown to appreciate and kind of value that so much more now after this attack, because like you just passing by, anyone knows you, everyone knows your beliefs, everyone knows what you stand for. And I think that's such a beautiful and powerful symbol of resilience, especially in a time like this where that's like one thing that everyone's going after. You can kind of judge the value of it, that you can kind of see how much strength you need to be wearing something like that in public. So I think that's one beautiful aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all the points that were made, but I also kind of feel I'm still scared. I kind of don't use the bus as much as I used to before. I don't walk long distances. I spend so much money on Uber just or on gas just so that I don't have to walk. But like I agree with what Munya said. This is an isolating experience, and especially when you don't have a support system that our community could have provided. I would have loved to seen some sort of facilitated community groups for hijabi women to kind of come together and talk and heal. But I haven't seen anything like that. I don't know if you guys have, but I haven't seen any of collective effort to heal and go past this.
I think for a lot of people, apart from like who are not Muslim, this was only a week-long thing, and then they started moving on with their lives. If I'm being entirely honest too, in the past when it came to different like the Quebec shooting and other things, right? You feel a sense of sadness of stuff going on in the world or even in your same country, or New Zealand, for example, you feel sad about it. But when it happens in your hometown, literally blocks away from where you live, that shakes you in a different sense. That is something that even when I'm like 40 years old, I will always look back to and remember exactly how I felt when I found out everything, right? It's not something you can get rid of. And I think what made it worse for me specifically is that I had spoken to a friend who knew more of the details of how the entire thing played out, right? And what this individual did and how horrific it was in detail. And I think after learning that information, which I honestly shouldn't have, I really, I felt like I needed some resources to be able to process that and get through that. And then I like going forward, like, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at anybody in the same light. Like, I don't think I'll be able to trust anyone fully, knowing that people are able to commit that horrific of an act, right? And be that ruthless when it comes to another human being.
Yeah. What do you guys hope to see in our community? Or like overall in Canada or specifically in London community? What do you guys want to see more of?
I think for me, it's like anti-Islamophobia programming in schools. I feel like that's one of the most important things, like elementary schools, high schools, because there's so many like biases that people have and so many opinions or misinformation like that people have. And I think one of the best things that we can do is to start that work when people are in school and younger.
I can go next, unless Insiya, you want to go.
No, go ahead, please.
In terms of what I want, I'll start with Western specifically. I want an acknowledgement that there is a problem and that they need to identify it and then work on it. In terms of education, I will say having some sort of programming on like EDI-based programming where every first-year student who comes in learns about different cultures, different like religions, right? Like different like ethnicities and whatnot. So I know for IB specifically over the summer, I worked on creating an EDI module and I worked on the Islamophobia component of it. And then when first year's HBA1 students came in, they were all required to go through it and reach each and every one of the modules. So we had perspectives from Black students, Muslim students, Jewish students, right? And I explained in that module what prayer is. If you see someone's foot in the sink, what does that mean? You know, like not to panic and not to be like, what is this person doing? Or what is fasting? Why do I wear the hijab? Or like some people might be hesitant to shaking hands. Why is that? I feel like that type of programming needs to be in every, like, it is not just Ivy, it needs to be for every first year student because you're gonna come across somebody that you might not be familiar with where they come from and what they practice, right? And being able to be equipped to handle a situation like that is very important because then it puts less burden on the other person who most likely is a minority to explain it to you. And I just feel like it would enhance the overall experience of like everyone attending Western.
Yeah, I agree. I think the EDI, they have so much potential and they can do amazing things. And they just need to do it instead of just talking and planning. They need to implement real changes that we can see. Insiya, do you want to add something?
Sure, I think I would love to see some more Muslims in places of power and being invited to share their opinions and share their experience on things that are not just diversity and EDI based work, right? So of course you're going to call in the Muslim guy and the hijabi when you want to talk about Islamophobia, but are you inviting them to your research panels? Are you inviting them to your academic panels, right? So whenever Western does anything like that, you literally only see white people. And it's one thing to make your students do modules and training things that tell them that, oh, you know, you should be accepting and you should be inclusive. And it's another to have your students watch you actively exclude these communities, right? So there are so many important scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs out there who are Muslim, and it's important that Western and just big academic institutions like this start inviting and opening up their spaces so that people are actively learning about them and engaging with them. And we're creating more welcoming spaces for people to succeed and progress in their fields, right? So there isn't this kind of barrier in place wherever they turn.
Just to go off of that, also when it comes to having scholarship panelists, like a panel of people who need to interview for your scholarships, right? Have it more than just white people. I went through an experience back in second year where I was interviewing for a scholarship because engineering and Ivy tuition is very expensive. And the entire panelist was white, and I was trying to explain to them the struggles of being a Muslim girl coming from, a Muslim community and trying to pursue engineering, what that's like, especially with the cultural like backlash, the fact that we don't I don't have a role model, like I don't know who to look up to. I've never had anybody, and it just felt like it was just going over their head, and I wasn't selected, which I'm not trying to be salty about that. But the reality is, though, is that I felt like there was a lack of connection to even like a lack of understanding and connection when I was talking about those experiences. So if you want to be equitable in terms of your finances, like Western, they need to take into consideration people with different backgrounds and their experiences and the struggles and hardships they've gone through to be where they're at today. Because you will never be able to, and they will never be able to be equal to someone who's had it much easier and has had privilege. And to be able to see through that privilege, unfortunately, it's very difficult for someone who has privilege to be able to see through their privilege entirely.
I agree. And it's so dehumanizing because it feels like you're just trauma dumping on them, right? And you're just like, you have to like expose everything that you've ever been through, all so they can, give you a couple $1,000, right? And it's just like the weird power balance that goes on there. It's just not a very welcoming environment.
Definitely. And like when you speak up on it, like a lot of people will just call you out for being salty for the fact that you didn't get it. It's not that. That's if I got it, if I didn't get it, that doesn't make a difference. It's the fact that the next person coming in after me should have an equal chance at that opportunity too. You know what I'm saying? That's how it should be looked at.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that ends our discussion for today. I just want to say Jazakallah khairan, everyone. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this for Ummah Affairs. This has been an amazing discussion. I think we all brought such amazing points, and I'm sure someone out there is going to listen to this and thank us for making this. May Allah reward us all, and Allah yarham the Afzaal family, and InShaAllah we can move on from this as a stronger London community, and maybe ensure that this will never ever happen again, InShaAllah. To our viewers at home, I hope you enjoyed our first episode of Ummah Speaks, brought to you by Ummah Affairs. Wassalamu alaikum.